Welcome back. We are looking forward to continue on page 244 where we left off. It's about 2/3 into the page. The line begins Memayatzeis Vadas, and we're holding on the third word, V'gam Mechlal B'chinas Netzach. If you're following, you can appreciate, you know this by now, the hemshech, the continuation of this Igeres HaKadosh, which, as we mentioned towards the very beginning, is very unique in its kind. It is a lengthy Igeres. It could be this is the longest possible epistle, or from the lengthier epistles of the Alter Rebbe, because here the Alter Rebbe, where the Alter Rebbe elaborates on is on the entire build-up of the 10 spheres, which the way we know it from the very beginning of Tanya, the third chapter of Tanya, the Alter Rebbe introduces to us regarding the neshama, that the neshama is not only one great beam of light, a godly light, that is, chelik of the kami mal mamash, part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as the Alter Rebbe in the very beginning of that chapter. Again, Lukuti Amorim is the first segment we mentioned many times. We'll do this quickly again. Tanya Kadisha has 5 segments. For that matter, this is with precision. This is the Teresh Biksav of Teresh Achsidus. As it's known, we're presently learning the 4th, Igeres HaKadosh, Igeres HaKadosh, which is the holy epistles of the Alter Rebbe, unique in its kind. We did have a presentation of the backdrop of this segment in the beginning of Yud, beginning of the 10th epistle, a click away. We're referring now to the very beginning of Lukuti Amorim, which is the very first segment, first out of the 5. Again, presently we're learning the 4th out of the 5. And this is the first, and the very beginning of the first. Alter Rebbe says that this great neshama has a very organized system, the way it expresses itself. A very healthy, organized system, the way it expresses itself in its relationship to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And you can see there, he says that it's the reason why it has all this, which is the cognitive faculties, the emotional faculties, in order to develop this personal relationship with Hashem, with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Then he says, Nishtal Shlomien, these just didn't come out of nowhere. This is the reason why the neshama has this, because it evolves from on high, as Alter Rebbe writes there in Perek Beis, the 2nd chapter of Lukuti Amorim, that the neshama comes from the on high, Atzilus, the holy, sanctified world of Atzilus, within Atzilus, Chochmah Atzilus. We spoke about this a few times. Atzilus is not just a supreme world. Atzilus is a world which houses the Ein Sof. And within Atzilus itself, the Chochmah, which again, Chochmah is not only the first of all the 10 spheres, Chochmah is unique in its kind. It's a perfect conduit to the energy of the Ein Sof. Hashem b'Chochmah, the famous title of the Alter Rebbe, even though literally it means Hashem b'Chochmah Yosadoros, Hashem establishes the world with Chochmah, the land with Chochmah, but Alter Rebbe has it Hashem b'Chochmah. He explains it so eloquently in the 18th chapter of Lukuti Amorim, the very first segment. He actually brings this pasuk Hashem b'Chochmah Yosadoros. Then you have it as well, the famous Hagah Sheshamaiti Mimeiri, which the Alter Rebbe brings from the Magid in the 35th chapter of Lukuti Amorim. It's all a click away. We mentioned many times wherever you're watching it. When we say easy to access and a click away, of course referring to the original website, which is the tanyaonline.com website. The original website is tanyaonline, one word.com. And and it's all set up in a way that it's truly easy. It's an easy click away. It's just a few seconds. You could have access to all the previous classes because we have it posted on the website itself. All the previous classes from the very beginning of the very first segment, Kuti Amorim, all the way to here. And also, you mentioned the advantage, the way it's set up, also easy to follow, but The main advantage, you have all the previous classes set up. For example, even this class, if you're a newcomer to this class, you want to know, I believe this is the 6th class on this Tezvav, on this 15th epistle, so it's right there on top of the site, on top of the site, from bottoms up, bottoms down, that is. And then towards the bottom, of course, you have Likutei Amarim, and these chapters which we just mentioned. So Alter Rebbe writes there that there's 10 spheres, and there's, in other words, so the neshama coming from Atzilus, and the neshama coming from Chochmah, but because it comes from Atzilus, so just look at Atzilus, there's the 10 spheres, as we know. We spoke about them many times. In every Eilim there's 10 spheres, so the neshama which comes from Nishtal Shalomehen also has this organized, structured 10 spheres, the way it expresses itself, namely, you're talking about a godly soul, its relationship to its godly source, ultimately to Hashem. So there, the Alter Rebbe speaks about Chochmah, Bina, Das, Chesed, and Gvura, which would be Abba V'Yira, of course, love and fear. But what about the other midas? Alter Rebbe says the branches to the Abba V'Yira. These are the chief midas. Here is the first time the Alter Rebbe elaborates with much detail and specification the nature and the character of every single sphere in relationship to man, or this the way the Alter Rebbe writes it here, to a father and a son, namely in the context of him being a teacher and a son being a pupil, to give over a concept, and later, of course, the Alter Rebbe will ultimately get to these midas and the starting from the Chochmah Bina Das, the cognitive faculties, and the later, subsequently, the midas. And we know midas are Tildis Chabad, as the Alter Rebbe has it there in the 3rd chapter, the offsprings of Chochmah Bina Das, in the way the Yid relates to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to his Creator. So we were holding over here, so we're holding in the examples the Alter Rebbe gives to explain to us the way it works, the way these 10 spheres express themselves in man to man, in this case, teacher to pupil. The Rebbe says a father learning with a son, but again, not the generic relationship of father and son, but as the father being the teacher and the son being the pupil. So he speaks about the chesed, the gvura, the netzach and haid, as we saw in last week's class. Baruch atah adinu shaker li bidvari. This is pretty much where we left off, by the midas of netzach and haid. It's very interesting the way the Alter Rebbe explained it. A few interesting examples, which the reason Alter Rebbe brought these examples is just to have it be able to us to formulate in our mind that there's certain things which are there to be given over, but they usually, their starting point is abstract, intangible, and then eventually we have a koyach, which this is the netzach v'haid, to break it apart, to dissect it, and in the cases of Alter Rebbe examples, it's to make it tangible, and in the context of teaching, to dissect it in a way that it should be tangible or palpable for the student. It should be able to be received in a way that the student, the pupil, really, really appreciates the message, not being lost in something which is abstract over their head and trying to tap into something which is beyond them. The teacher, the pedagogue, has the ability to break this down. And Alter Rebbe writes, the kloyes yayatzes, the kidneys, which are called the yayatzes, they give the suggestion, the eitzah, how to break this down. This is within the midah. This is what these two midas are all about, netzach and haid, as we explained last week. It's the kayach Hashem gives within the system of the human being to take this which is abstract and bring it down into a way that is appreciated, understood, perceived, again in the context of teaching from master to pupil. That the student should really, really understand it, relate to it, and it should be something which is just hovering over them. and that is a very unique koyach. That is what Netzach and Haida are all about. Then the Alter Rebbe, this is where we're holding Begam, there's another dimension with the Netzach. If you look what Netzach is all about, literally translated, Netzach means victory. It's interesting. Today we should start this with Gam Bichlal B'chinas Netzach. Shall it be that so what is the Netzach over here and what we're talking about? So before the Alter Rebbe said Netzach v'Haid, these are the Kleis Yeyatzes that we're able to dissect the matter and make it relatable. Alter Rebbe has another idea and another explanation in Netzach, which we begin today's class. L'natseach v'lamed neged kol meinei hashpah v'alim mibnei mibayis v'chutz. To be victorious, to triumph over oneself, and to stand against anything which would prevent this teaching from his son. Again, he speaks about father and son, but not in the context of the connection, relationship of father and son, the loving relationship of father and son, but rather the father, the teacher, and the son, the pupil. So whatever would prevent this study from his son, from inside and from outside. And what is the inside and outside? Says the Alter Rebbe, Mibayis, we'll explain this in a moment. Mibayis hanilis chazek, kin neged midas hagvura vatsimtzum sheba'av atzmei shehi meireres dinim b'tzeine al b'nei loymar she'einu roi l'kachadayin. So if you notice over here, he says the following word, B'ksaviyad nirsham chaser, there's missing over here because you're missing the Haid dimension, the way the Alter Rebbe breaks down the Netzach. So what's the Haid vis-a-vis the Netzach over here? So it says that there is missing in the original Rishima, the original manuscript of this epistle, Igeres HaKadosh, and nonetheless, we could understand, because Alter Rebbe right away jumps to Yisoid, which is the subsequent midah. So in this breaking down and again talking about Netzach, not the Netzach v'Haid, like Alter Rebbe explains it earlier, but Netzach is a separate midah, which we'll explain in a moment what it is. But rather, and so where's the Haid? Again, vis-a-vis Haid, so he says this is missing. So I can't tell you exactly what the Alter Rebbe writes there in the original manuscript. But let's talk about the Netzach. What does it mean, the Netzach mibayis mechutz? There's a certain time and there's a certain point of the teaching of the master, where the master gives over to the student, because as those of you are teachers by trade, or generally everyone one way or another has taught and given over. If it's a father and a child, it's reviewing their study as homework, as an example, or any other seder of learning, any other order of learning with your child. You know, and you could, and that it comes to a point that you lose it. Not lose it in a way that's not to keep it to the context which we're talking about. Lose it, not to lose it, to be angry and on your son or you're on your student that they don't understand the first time, and the last time you should not be teaching if you lose it. It's loy hakapdam nalamed. It's it says in the Pirkei Avos, Ethics of a Father. If you really lose it, so you shouldn't be teaching, because the whole point of it is to understand that you know the knowledge, you're an adult, or you know the knowledge based on your prior investment in your own study, or you were taught as a young child as well, and people had a lot of patience to relate to you this information, so appreciate it. And when you come to a state that you have to teach the other, or it's your son, or it's any other student, you have to be very focused and understand this is a child, a recipient, which is on the starting point. It's not somebody who is acquainted with the subject in general, or even they are, but the details and the specification of this teaching, they are not aware of it. For that matter, that's why you're teaching it to them. So you have to understand the dynamics of this very teaching, that you have a recipient, which they have their own cognitive faculties, which are limited, and you have to be the talented teacher to develop these faculties and to share this information, to share your cognitive faculty, in other words, to share your thoughts and your wisdom and your knowledge with this student. And again, it's a trade. It's something which one has to work on. This is the profession of a teacher. This is the trade of a teacher. It's not just you come over and you establish yourself as, so to say, this tape recorder and push play and look at your clock, and when you're done for your coffee break, you put the device on pause and then you come in and you push play again. No, it's a talent, because there's something which is transpiring over here. Yourself as a teacher and this student as this pupil as a recipient, and there's a system, the way the information is transmitted from yourself to the student. There is a system, and you have to follow the system, and when you do, you'll be not only successful, but you'll be very successful. And as it says, a teacher establishes this connection with a child, with a recipient, with a student, not only in a way that they're able to pass on information, but the information, the whole connection between the student and their teacher is not only based on, it's not only informative, but it's transformative. There's a famous expression of the Gemara that after 40 years, yeah, that's a long time, and nonetheless, the student could start thinking similar to their master. So it's not only they are able to, so to say, culminate 40 years of learning of an entire structure of information, but beyond that, they're able to have this experience, this transformative experience, that they're able to start thinking along the lines or similar to their very teacher. Because there was a connection, a unique connection, based on the way the teacher, the master, connects with the pupil. So here, so this is so when we say lose it, meaning not like as in the context of a kapdon, because again you shouldn't, the loy hakapdon melamed says the Pirkei Avos, it means that you really start doubting yourself. You teach and you go on with a program, the correct program, the way it's explained, at least up till here. And even then, you look at the situation, you say, it's not really working. There's something which is not clicking with the student. They're not picking up the information. And I went through this protocol, the way it's meant to be, in other words, the way it's meant to be executed, the way it's written in so many places, or in this holy sefer, the Geras HaKodesh over here, in this Tezvav, and I break it apart and I dissect the matter, or up till here, the Chesed, the Gvura, the Tiferes, the Netzach, the Hoid, the way I learned it up till here, and I'm doing it right, but yet I feel sometimes that it just doesn't work, and to the extent that I sometimes want to give it up and say, no, you know what, it's not working. Come back to me in a month, or in 2 months, or never find yourself another teacher. It's just not working. So part of the Netzach, it's not only you have to drag something in from elsewhere, this is part of the Netzach in the context of being that pedagogue, being that teacher, being that transmitter of information. This is where the Netzach comes in and ought to be utilized to say, no, I'm going to triumph over myself and say, no, of course it's going to work. Of course it's going to happen. Of course it ought to happen. Of course it's meant to happen. So yes, it's going to happen. And that Netzach, to overcome myself, is a turning point that eventually it does happen, and the student becomes the proper keli, container, vessel to receive the information of the master, and more so successfully eventually that the student will start thinking again as the time goes on along the lines of the master, the way the master thinks. So it's a certain moment and it's a certain period where you want to say to yourself, there is, as in the Lashon over here, let's see it inside, linatseach, to triumph over yourself, and to stand firmly with determination against anything which would prevent the study from mibnoi, from your son, mibayis mechutz, from the inside and the outside. Meaning to say, we say mibayis, which is something which is brewing within you. Lischazik, you have to strengthen yourself because you have this midas hagvura, this midah of discipline or tzimtzum, which is condensement, holding back, which you have that sensation, so to say, to hold back at that very moment, and you have to triumph over that. You have to strengthen yourself over that. That is the midah of nitzachon within yourself. Sheba'av atzmei, the Father, shehimeiredes dinim, which arouses certain dinim, meaning to say areas of severity, expressions of severity, birtzaynai, with your own desire, al benai, on your son, leimar, and what something was telling you at the moment, einai roi lekach hadayin, he is not yet fitted to hear this information. He's not ready yet. He or she is not ready yet. Let's wait a month. Let's wait 2. Let's wait a year. Let's someone else try to explain this. They're not good to go as of yet. So let me stop at my tracks right now and let's start another time. Try to convey this at another time, another opportunity, or again later in a different stage, a different setting, or when the child gets older, as an example. Right now they're not ready. But the truth of the matter, they are ready. It's about you as the teacher to grab that midah of netzach, which is the term, that midah of triumphing and being victorious over your own self. And standing with determination says, yes, this will work. And the moment you shift with that netzach and you say this will work, that becomes a game changer. As those who teach know that when you cross that threshold, that with determination, that this will work and this child will understand this information properly, comprehensively, things start working. And they really do, and with much success. That's the midah of netzach. As Al Rebbe continues over what we learned last week in the last class between netzach and hayid, which is the idea of dissecting a matter, that it should not remain abstract. There is the dimension of netzach, to literally be victorious over your own self. That's mibayis. Because there's something right there, as you see the recipient is struggling to get it. And you want to say to yourself, no, it's not working. And you come in with that netzach and say, of course it's working, or of course it's going to work. And that shift is a game changer in yourself being a teacher, and as well in the adjustment of the pupil, and it starts working. And it works with hatzlacha, with much success. Then there is, Al Rebbe doesn't go on, this is part of this which is missing, mibachutz. Sometimes there's outside disturbances, as an example, and distractions, and you have to overcome that as well. This is what the Alter Rebbe meant with machutz, but again, he doesn't elaborate. This is also part of which was missing, and again, of course, the hayid is missing based on the way the Alter Rebbe is dividing the netzach and the hayid, different than he did last week, which he coupled the netzach and hayid together, which was called the kloyas yeyatzais, which were there the idea of taking something abstract and dissecting it, making it attainable to the recipient to appreciate. So where are we holding at this time? We're holding Yisaid. What is the idea of Yisaid? And again, in the context of teacher-student, Again, you see that time again he says father and son, but again the father, the way the father is a teacher, the father's teaching his child. So what is the idea of Yisaid? As we know, Yisaid in the Midas is the idea of Iskashrus, of connection. And generally, when we say Yisaid, it's about intimate connection. And again, that's the generic idea of the Yisaid. But what is it? How do you translate it in the connection between teacher and pupil? So the Rebbe goes on, he says, it's the idea of the connection of the intellect of the father with the intellect of the son, what he learns with him, with love and desire. He has a strong desire that the son should understand, and without that connection, that, so to say, an affectionate connection, but again, affectionate in the way that I'm so determined that you understand this. I have such a desire and motivation that you should understand it. And as such, there is an actual, true, deep connection between the father and the son. As such, that really causes that the son should even appreciate more and more. And that, in return, causes the father to extend himself more and more, meaning to say, in the way he would give it over, with more, with greater explanations and greater, because of the enthusiasm over here, which is usually come when there is a connection, to be mashpia more and more, to be more elaborate, to find better words, to find better expressions in order that it should be truly appreciated and absorbed, niklat, absorbed by the student, by the son in this case, which is the student. And if there wasn't that connection, that even the child would listen how his father is giving over the same information, but there's not that connection. When he would medaber ba'adi, as an example, the father would learn the same subject for himself, sitting in a seat, and the child would just walk by and listen to his father learning for himself. And even he uses words, similar words, the way he would give over as he would be formally teaching his child, as an example. But nonetheless, he is not teaching his child. Loimed L'Atzmei, he would be learning for himself, and the child would pick up, walk by. Maybe Kolkach, he wouldn't understand this that much. Kumay Achshav, like as opposed to now, Sha'aviv Mikasher Sichle, a love that a father connects his intellect to him, a Medaber Imei Panim Apanim, when he speaks to him face to face, be Ava with love, v'cheshik and desire, shecheshik ma'oid. Sheyavim b'nei, he has such a great desire that his son should understand. And the kol masha cheshik v'ataynu godel, the greater there is the desire, and the greater there is the pleasure. Kachashpa v'alimud godel, that's how much the study itself is expanded. Shaben yuchel lekabel yeser, and consequently the son could receive more. Mashpia yeser, and the father gives more because because through the desire, the excitement, and the pleasure, the intellect itself becomes greater and becomes much more increased. Be'archavas hadas, with the broadening of the knowledge, lashpia lalamid lebenai, to give over and to teach a son. Now, again, those of you taught or give over, you'll always notice that when there is a connection between the teacher and the recipients, if it's a lecture, if it's a study, if there's even a smaller shiur class as an example, when there's an interest, when there is, so to say, the lock-in between the eye and the interest of the recipient to the eye and the interest of the teacher, there is an immediate ability for the teacher to express him or herself so much in such so differently and so distinctly, and to find words which, if there wouldn't be that connection, they wouldn't find those words and that manner to express himself with that much precision and that much elaboration and that much expansiveness, because then it would remain a seichel without the tainug, without the pleasure. And again, it needs not to be elaborated, because whenever you teach, when you find, the more you find the interest in the recipient, and not only the interest, the connection, you click, you lock in the interest and the eye between the recipient, the recipients and the teacher, the more the teacher has the ability to elaborate and again, quantitatively to say more, and those words they say are full and more accurate and more pleasurable in a way that the receiver understands it so much easier and with much greater delight, if you will, because there's such an expansion in the talk, in the expression, in the verbiage, in the wordage of the master, because of that connection, because of the skashrus. And Alter Rebbe brings the example the way it is physical, because we talk about Yusaid. And we'll do this brackets over here quickly. He says just like physically, you see the Mei Aderech Moshe Begashmi physically, Ribi Azera, that the greater, the more seed comes from, the greater there is the pleasure and delight. And through this, there's physically more drawn from the source of where the seed comes from, and therefore, therefore, the wise of truth compared the teaching where you're trying to give over actual intellectual substance to the recipient, and they compared it to the actual relationship of intimate relationship, where you're also drawing from the source of where this zed, of where this comes from, which is, we know this is from the mayach, and the more, the greater the pleasure, the more is drawn from its source, from the mayach. And again, in the state of the mayach, it's intangible and eventually becomes tangible. As Dr. Rebbe explains it later when he spoke earlier, when he spoke about the netzach and height, again in the previous class. We mentioned before, TanyaOnline.com. I believe we did mention all the classes, including all the previous classes on in this very Igeres HaKadosh, the original website, TanyaOnline.com. So we had this, I believe, the last class or the class before, the way it's nimshach from the mayach into actuality. But here the Alter Rebbe points out that the more, as it is physically, the more the pleasure, the more one draws. So the Chachmei Emes, in general, they compared the two of the actual connection between the Mashpia and Mekabel in this context to the way it is when the master gives over intellectual content, which is also coming from the Mayach, from the brain, to a recipient, which in this case, it's the information which is being passed on. We could, just like it is in all areas of the two, in this case also, we establish this as an analogous in this detail as well, that the more the pleasure, the more the hashpah. And again, we see it evidently, we don't have to elaborate on this when you're sitting in front of people, and the difference is when there is an interest and when there's no interest is a very stark difference. And not only talking about a certain disinterest, meaning to say completely, oh, I have to be here and I really don't want to be here. We're not talking about the far extreme. We're talking about, yes, I want to be here and I want to understand, but there's missing the connection. And that's why it's part of the talent of the teacher to establish the connection, meaning to say the connection in context, of course, the connection in context of interest. And there should be the hiskashrus, the connection between the master and the pupil, because the more they lock in their connection, they're many times expressed by, you see it via the eye, the lock-in of the eye of the teacher and the pupil, or more so the deeper hiskashrus is locked in, one looking and seeking for the information that causes by the teacher to talk in such a different way. In other words, so much more elaborate and so much more expansive and articulate. The master can articulate the matter, and ultimately, of course, this becomes a total different hashpah and absorbed and so differently and uniquely and distinctly in the mind and heart of the recipient. And again, we need not to more than elaborate. The hiskashus, the connection that the master is not a tape recorder. I say tape recorder, the good old tape recorders. The way I grew up, it was it's not a matter of just giving over robotically information. That is usually not absorbed. But when there's the connection of master and pupil, oh, that's a different story. And many times the pupil walks away mesmerized because they got something which wasn't just about information, hearing from robotically, or as he says over here, when the father, in this case the teacher would, which is the teacher sitting and learning by themselves, so all the words come out, and the child, which would be the student, walks by and he wants to even listen and finds interest, but you cannot compare what they're going to pick up as opposed to if they're seated face to face and they connect with each other. Father and son connect on this, again, intellectual plane, and the connection arouses or brings about so much more. Again, he says quantitatively and qualitative. It's expressed quantitatively and qualitatively with a quantity and quality which comes from the master because of this connection, because of that pleasure, that delight which they both find in this one in receiving the information and this one in providing and extending the information. So now that we learned about, now we're holding aside, where's Malchus over here in this area? So the Alter Rebbe, we're going to see about Malchus, because the Alter Rebbe, we know Malchus is a separate midah, as we know in Kabbalah and Chassidus, and we can appreciate why the Alter Rebbe does not here speak about Malchus, though later, when he speaks about the relationship with Hashem, and the Yid and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the way the Yid utilizes his 10 spheres, starting from his cognitive faculties to his emotional faculties, the Alter Rebbe does bring Malchus. And of course, Malchus is the most important because we have to mikabel upon ourselves El Malchus Shamayim. That's the main idea of the relationship with the Yid with the Kodesh Baruch Hu. Hashem is not our buddy. He is our king, and therefore we accept upon ourselves the reign, the Malchus of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But here the Alter Rebbe doesn't. In the analogy, in the way he speaks about the 10 spheres when it comes to human, in this case, the father as a teacher to a son, the pupil. We'll learn another little bit over here. These midas are the external dimension of the nefesh, and even in this case also, even between father and son, and translated, or the way the illustration here is, the father as a teacher and the son as a pupil, there is the chitzainis of the midah, which comes from the chitzainis of the nefesh. The way it's these midas give the ability to the teacher, the master, to execute this teaching, but but there is the inner dimension of these midas. When we talk about chesed and gvura, of course, that would be ava v'yira, love and fear. What's the connection of love and fear in this relationship? A father and son is the father, the teacher, and the son, the student. As an example, this very father, which is extending this information to his son, because he loves him. And he says, starting from when talking about the love, the chesed, the way it's explained before, that's the way we execute this hashpah, this teaching. But the pnimius of chesed, we spoke many times, that very third chapter of Likutei Amarim, the first segment, which we mentioned before, explained it there. We can all understand why chesed is ava, but ava is the pnimius of chesed, the inner dimension of chesed, and of course yira would be the inner dimension of gvura. We explained it there many times, and we could appreciate it on the surface. So in this case, when he speaks about the pnimis amidus, even in context of the teacher and the student, is there's the Ava. What is the Ava? He loves his child, and therefore he's ready to spend time and be on time to give him the proper attention, because he really wants to fill the child with all this important and vital information, especially information associated with Torah information, Torah knowledge, in order that the child should be a proper Yid and to be able to implement and execute their mandate, why they were sent to this world as adults, responsible adults, and eventually them being establishing their own home and their own family to give over the message, the godly and divine message, to their own children. So the father, he loves his child, therefore he extends himself to the child, gives him the attention, and teaches him all this important and vital information. Then he prevents, which is the idea of gvura. It's interesting. Why minei hashpa'asei? I would say he makes sure not to hold back because of fear that he should not come to any stumbling. I mean to say that there's the idea of fear as well, in context of concern, worry, that if I don't give my child this information, this knowledge for him or her to be able to absorb, live with, identify with, and grow up with, and have it with them, gam ki yaskin liyosem mimeno, as they grow up, that it should not budge from them. There's an idea that there is that fear that I need to do it, that chas v'shalom, if I don't, the child will stumble in the areas which are vital that they don't stumble. Starting chas v'shalom, they should not do anything contrary to halacha, or to do two things or other things contrary to the halacha. So I teach them because I'm concerned that they should not come to any state of stumble, God forbid. So what's behind this? So there's the gvura, as we explained previously in this teaching here, in this epistle. The midah to actually execute this hashpah, as we explained before, the idea of discipline. Again, you can see it in the previous classes. But the pnimis of gvura is, of course, yira. What am I fearing? I'm fearing that chas v'shalom, if I should not give over to my child the information that they need to hear, they might stumble. So I'm just trying to still understand what is meineya hashpa'osei. He prevents. Seems like it's the idea of, yes, preventing, maybe yes, holding back, that it should come in a proper package and form, because if I don't do it that way, that could bring a michshel, that could bring any stumbling. I got to look at this again. It just catches my attention at this time. But either way, what he's saying is, of course, there's the chesed and gvura, and these midas, there's the chitzenius, the external dimension of them, coming from the external dimension of the nefesh, meaning to say how to execute all this. But then there's the pnimius of these very midas, which is the energy of them, the love, the fear. And he goes on, v'gaimer, v'chulu, etc. All the midas have an inner dimension to them, which leads to the outer dimension in order to bring it to a state of actuality, to realize this which I want to make real to the student, to the pupil. Then the Alter Rebbe is going to go back to the Chochmah Bina Das, the cognitive faculties, which is the source of these midas. And the Alter Rebbe is going to explain it the way it is, again, between human to human, and the way he explains it from father to son, as father the teacher, the son the pupil. And with this, eventually, the Alter Rebbe would go on the way it is in the relationship of the Yid with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We'll just mention over here, interesting, today we started with Netzach, should be the great Nitzachim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, whatever represents God, godliness, Hashem's holy Torah, Hashem's divine message, and ultimately the Nitzachon, of course, for Am Yisrael, for Eretz Yisrael, for Torah, and individually, the great Nitzachon for every individual, and every individual Yid, and in their, as individual, in all the details of their life, there should be a great Nitzachon, a great victory, again manifesting in all areas of life, and to everyone, every individual Yid, and in general, for the good people in the world, and for the world in its entirety, namely the Shleimus of Torah, Shleimus of Eretz Yisrael, and Shleimus of Am Yisrael. Have a wonderful night.